This is an AMBW love story, a Korean billionaire and the black waitress who changed everything about how he understood his own life. In Seoul's most exclusive ballroom, Amara, the only black woman in a sea of Korean elite, watched the wine glass slip from her fingers before she even registered that her hand had let go of it. "You did that on purpose," the woman hissed, dabbing at the dark red splash creeping across the front of her cream silk dress. Her diamond ring caught the chandelier light as she jabbed a finger toward Amara's chest. "Do you know who I am? Do you know who he is?" Amara's heart was hammering, but her voice came out steady. "Ma'am, it was an accident. I tripped over the— Save it." The woman's lip curled. God, they really do let anybody work these events now. Across the ballroom, Minjun Kong, heir to the Kong Chaebol, one of Seoul's most powerful Korean business dynasties, set down his own glass without a sound. He'd been half listening to a senator's wife talk about her grandson's soccer trophies, nodding at the right intervals, when the crash cut through the noise. His eyes found the scene instantly. Vivian, his fiancée, standing over a waitress with her chin lifted like she was addressing a stray dog that had wandered into her living room. He knew that waitress. Not personally, but he'd noticed her twice tonight already, once when she'd made an elderly guest laugh so hard he'd nearly choked on his champagne, and once when she'd quietly slipped a lost child back to her parents without making a scene of it. She moved through the room like she belonged in it, even in the black and white uniform that was supposed to make her invisible. She did not look invisible to him. Vivian. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The people nearest them went quiet the way a room does when a storm changes direction. "What's going on here?" "She ruined my dress. Minjun ruined it. I want her fired. Tonight." He looked at Amara. Really looked. Her hands were shaking slightly at her sides, but her spine was straight, her jaw set. Not the posture of someone waiting to be punished. The posture of someone who'd been underestimated her whole life and had long since stopped flinching over it. "What happened?" he said, and it wasn't a question aimed at Vivian. Amara swallowed. "There's a loose tile by the service door, sir. I've told the events coordinator twice tonight. I tripped. The tray went. I'm sorry about the dress." "She's lying. I wasn't asking you again." Minjun didn't raise his voice. He never had to. 20 years in this world had taught him that the men who yelled were the ones who hadn't figured out yet that silence cut deeper. "I asked her." Vivian's mouth opened, then closed. Something flickered behind her eyes, the first real flicker of fear Amara had seen from her all night. "Get the coordinator," Minjun said to the nearest staff member, not looking away from Amara. "Find out about that tile. Tonight. I don't want anyone else hurt because we were too cheap to fix a floor." "Minjun." Vivian's voice had dropped, gone syrupy and pleading. "You're embarrassing me. In front of everyone. You embarrassed yourself the moment you decided a torn dress mattered more than a person almost getting hurt." He finally turned to face her fully, and Amara watched 20 pairs of eyes in the ballroom pretend very hard not to be watching. "Go home, Vivian. We'll talk tomorrow." She left in a blur of cream silk and fury, heels clicking a furious rhythm across the marble, and the ballroom exhaled as one. Minjun crouched, unbothered by the $2,000 suit, and began picking up the broken glass with his bare hands. "Sir, you don't have to." "I know I don't have to." He set a shard on the tray. She was still somehow holding steady. "You've been on your feet for 6 hours in shoes that don't fit right, carrying trays for people who won't remember your face by morning, and the first time something goes wrong, it's your fault. That's not how tonight ends." Amara didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing, kneeling across from him, close enough that she could smell cedar and something warmer underneath it, close enough to see that his hands, despite the calm in his voice, weren't quite steady either. "What's your name?"
Amara.
"Amara Bellinger." "Amara." He said it slowly, like he was testing the shape of it in his mouth. "I'm going to have that tile fixed by tomorrow morning. And I'm going to make sure the agency knows tonight wasn't your fault. You don't need to do that." "I know." His eyes met hers, dark and unreadable and entirely too steady for a man who'd just publicly humiliated his own fiancée. "I'm doing it anyway." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. She hesitated for half a second, long enough for both of them to notice before she took it. His grip was warm.
Certain.
And when their palms touched, something passed between them that had nothing to do with spilled wine or broken glass, something that made her pull her hand back a beat too late, and made him let go a beat too slow. "Thank you, Mr. Kong." "Min-jun," he corrected. Then, quieter, almost to himself, "And you're welcome, Amara Bellinger." He watched her walk away toward the kitchen, tray balanced, back straight, and something settled in his chest that felt dangerously close to certainty. Vivian had spent 3 years being his fiancée and had never once looked at him the way this waitress had looked at the broken glass on the floor, like she was more concerned about the mess than about herself. He didn't know her. He'd known her for 4 minutes. But Min-jun Kong had built a chaebol empire on trusting his instincts in rooms full of liars, and every instinct in his body was telling him the same thing, over and over, as he watched the kitchen doors swing shut behind her.
Mine.
She's mine. And I'm not sharing her with anyone, not this world, not my family, and certainly not Vivian. He just had to figure out how to make her believe it before someone else got to her first. If you're loving Amara and Min-jun already, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I read every single one, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The agency called Amara at 7 a.m., which should have been her first warning that something had shifted overnight. "You're being requested for a private event," her supervisor, Denise, said, sounding baffled. "Personally requested. By name. By Min-jun Kong." Amara sat up in bed so fast she knocked her phone charger off the nightstand. "Requested how?" "I served one party for that man last night." "I don't know, sweetheart, but he's paying triple rate and asking specifically for you to head the service team for dinner at his home Friday. You in or not? Because if you're not, I've got 6 other girls who'll fight me for it." She thought about the way his hand had felt around hers. The way he'd knelt on marble in a suit worth more than her rent to pick up glass, so she wouldn't have to. "I'm in," she said, before she could talk herself out of it. By Friday, she'd told herself a dozen times it was just a job. A very well-paid job, in a mansion overlooking the water, for a man who was clearly used to getting what he wanted and had apparently decided he wanted competent service staff. That was all. That story lasted exactly as long as it took him to open his own front door. "You didn't have to come to the door yourself," she said, because it was easier than saying anything true. "I wanted to see your face when you realized there's no dinner party." Min-jun stepped back to let her in, and behind him, the house was dark, quiet, set for exactly 2. Amara's stomach dropped somewhere near her sensible flats. "Mr. Kong." "Min-jun. Min-jun. If this is some kind of, it's not what you think." He said it fast, firm, like he'd rehearsed it and still worried it wouldn't land right. "I didn't bring you here to, I would never do that. I brought you here because I couldn't stop thinking about you, and I didn't know another way to see you again that didn't involve me showing up at whatever restaurant you actually work at like some kind of stalker." She almost laughed. Almost. "So, instead you had my agency send me to a fake dinner party." When you say it like that, it does sound worse. "It sounds like you're used to getting exactly what you want, Mr. Kong." "Min-jun," he corrected again, softer this time. "And no, I'm used to people giving me what they think I want because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. You looked me in the eye 4 days ago and told me the truth about a broken tile even though my fiancé was standing right there demanding you get fired for it. Nobody does that. Not to me." The house smelled like garlic and butter, and underneath the tension, Amara's stomach growled loud enough that they both heard it. For the first time, something in his controlled expression cracked into an actual, unguarded smile. "I can cook, if that helps my case at all." "You cooked." "Badly, possibly. There's a very real chance we're ordering delivery as backup." He gestured toward the kitchen, and after a long moment, she followed him. They ate at the kitchen island instead of the enormous dining table clearly built for boardroom dinners, and it turned out Min-jun Kong feared across 3 industries. The man tabloids called the Ice Prince of Seoul could not, in fact, cook, and burned the garlic bread so badly the smoke alarm went off twice. Amara laughed until her stomach hurt, watching a Korean chaebol heir in a $200 apron frantically wave a dish towel at the ceiling sensor, and something about the sound of her own laughter in that too big, Too quiet house made him go still and watch her like he was trying to memorize it. "What?" she asked, wiping her eyes. "Nothing. I just don't think anyone's laughed like that in this house before." The rest of the night unspoled slower than she expected. No grand declarations, no forced romance, just two people finding out they liked the same terrible reality shows and disagreed violently about pineapple on pizza. He told her about growing up the only heir to a chaebol empire built by a father who measured love in quarterly earnings, about being raised in South Korea with the weight of a dynasty on his shoulders before he'd learned to read. She told him about her mother's diner in Charlotte, about working 3 jobs to help pay for her little brother's college tuition, about how she'd never once, in 26 years, had someone cook for her badly on purpose, just to make her laugh. A black girl from Charlotte and a Korean chaebol heir. Every warning sign told her to run. But sitting at that kitchen island, laughing at burnt garlic bread like none of the rest of it existed, it didn't feel like a K-drama fantasy she needed to guard herself against. It just felt true. By the time she left near midnight, something had shifted between them that neither of them named out loud. It was easier not naming it at first. Easier to pretend the dinner had been a one-time thing, a strange fluke of loneliness and curiosity. Easier until the second dinner. And the third. Until Min-jun started sending his driver to pick her up after her shifts, quietly, before either of them acknowledged out loud what they were doing. Vivian noticed before either of them said a word. She showed up at Min-jun's office on a Tuesday afternoon, dropping a manila folder onto his desk with the particular satisfaction of a woman who'd been planning her entrance. "I did some digging," she said, "into your little waitress." Min-jun didn't look up from his monitor. "Her name is Amara." "Her name," Vivian said, sliding the folder toward him, "is Amara Bellinger, 26. From Charlotte. Currently $72,000 in debt from putting her brother through Duke. Works 2 jobs. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment with a roommate she can barely afford to split rent with." She smiled, sharp as broken glass. "You really think a black woman drowning in debt just happened to fall for a Korean billionaire, Min-jun? Open your eyes. She's playing you." He finally looked up, and his expression was colder than Vivian had seen it in 3 years together. "Get out of my office. I'm trying to protect you. You're trying to protect your inheritance." He stood, sliding the folder back across the desk without opening it. "We're done, Vivian. I should have ended this the night you humiliated a woman for tripping over a tile your family's company installed too cheaply to fix. Have your lawyer call mine." Vivian's face went white, then red, then something colder and more calculating than either. "You'll regret this," she said quietly, gathering the folder. "Both of you will." She left without slamming the door, which somehow felt worse than if she had. That night, Min-jun sat alone in his office long after everyone had gone home, staring at the folder he hadn't opened, thinking about $72,000 in debt and a woman who'd never once asked him for anything. He didn't know yet that Vivian's threat wasn't an empty one. He didn't know that by morning, an anonymous tip would land in 3 different tabloids' inboxes, painting Amara as a gold-digging waitress who'd engineered the whole broken tile incident from the start. He didn't know that the woman who'd made him laugh harder than he had in a decade was about to wake up to her name trending for all the wrong reasons. If you've got a Min-jun in your life who burns the garlic bread but shows up anyway, tell me about him in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The headlines were waiting for Amara before her alarm even went off. Korean billionaire's secret waitress. Gold digger or true love? Exclusive. The waitress who accidentally ruined an engagement. Sources say it was all a setup. Min-jun Kang's new mystery woman is $72,000 in debt. Coincidence? Her phone buzzed nonstop, half her coworkers texting screenshots, the other half asking if it was true. Was she really seeing him? Was she really that desperate for money? Denise called before 8 to say gently, apologetically, that 2 of the agency's biggest clients had requested she not be sent to their events anymore. Bad optics, they'd said. Nothing personal. Amara sat on the edge of her bed, phone shaking in her hand, and felt something in her chest crack clean in half. She'd spent her whole life being underestimated quietly, in small rooms, by small people. This was different. This was her name and her mother's diner and her brother's tuition debt splashed across the internet for millions of strangers to pick apart and judge. Minjun called 11 times before she finally answered. I didn't do this, he said, before she could get a word out. Vivian leaked your file to the tabloids. I already have my lawyers on it. I'm having every article's sourcing challenged. Stop. Her voice came out flat, exhausted. Just stop, Minjun.
Amara.
You knew who I was going into this. You knew there was money between us and power, and now the whole world knows exactly how much debt I'm carrying like it's a character flaw. Her voice cracked despite herself. Everyone thinks I'm some scheme. My mother called me crying this morning because a customer at her diner asked if it was true I trapped a billionaire. None of that is true, and it doesn't matter what strangers on the internet think. It matters to me. The words came out louder than she meant. I have spent my entire life working twice as hard to be seen as half as capable, Minjun. I don't have the luxury of not caring what people think, because when they decide I'm something ugly, it follows me. It follows my family. You get to release a statement and move on. I don't get that same grace. There was a long silence on the line. You're right, he said finally, quietly. I don't understand what that's like. Not the way you live it every day. But I understand what it's like to have people decide who you are before they've ever spoken to you my whole life. People have looked at me and seen a bank account instead of a person. I hoped that was one thing we understood about each other. Amara closed her eyes, throat tight. I need space, she said. Not forever.
Just right now.
I need to breathe without a camera flash in my face. He didn't argue. That, more than anything he could have said, told her he'd actually heard her. Okay, he said. Take whatever time you need. I'm not going anywhere, Amara. I meant what I said the first night. You're not something I'm willing to share with this world's opinion of you. I'll wait. For 2 weeks, he kept his word. No calls she hadn't initiated first. No dramatic gestures, no flowers, no grand public defenses, just a single quiet legal statement confirming Vivian's engagement had ended due to irreconcilable differences, and that the recent tabloid stories about Ms. Bellinger were categorically false and legally addressed. It was Amara's mother, of all people, who finally pushed her to call him back. Baby, I've watched you work yourself half to death trying to prove to the world you deserve good things, she said over the phone, wiping down the diner counter in the background the way she always did when she was thinking hard. That man burned garlic bread for you and picked glass up off a marble floor with his bare hands. Seems to me like maybe you already proved it, and it's time you let yourself believe it too. Amara showed up at his office unannounced on a Thursday evening, past when his assistant had gone home, and found him exactly where she somehow knew he'd be alone, tie loosened, staring at a spreadsheet he clearly wasn't reading. You waited, she said from the doorway. He looked up, and the relief on his face was so raw it nearly undid her. I told you I would. I looked into you too, you know, she said, stepping inside. While I was taking my space. Turns out the tabloids have been calling you cold and ruthless for a decade. Turns out none of your employees agree. Every single person I talked to said you personally covered 3 different staff members' medical bills last year. Quietly, no press release. She crossed the room slowly. Turns out we're both used to people deciding who we are without asking.
Amara.
I'm not done being scared, she said honestly. The debt is real. The pressure is real. Vivian isn't done. I can feel it. But I'm done letting fear make my decisions for me. She stopped in front of him. I want to try. For real. Not hiding, not sneaking around in fake dinner parties. For real. In front of everyone who wants to have an opinion about it, every tabloid, every Chable board member, every person who thinks a black woman from Charlotte has no business standing next to a Korean billionaire. Minjun stood slowly, close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating off him. You're mine, he said quietly, cupping her face in both hands like she was something rare he'd been afraid to touch too hard. I'm not sharing you with anyone's doubt ever again, not the tabloids, not my family, not Vivian, not even your own fear. Just tell me you'll let me stand next to you while you fight it, instead of fighting it alone. I can do that, she whispered. He kissed her then, finally, slow and certain, like he'd been waiting his whole guarded life for exactly this moment and had no intention of rushing through it. Neither of them saw the shadow slip away from the frosted glass door. Vivian, who'd bribed a night security guard to let her onto the executive floor, phone raised. Already recording. She smiled at the footage on her screen, cold and satisfied. "Enjoy it while it lasts," she murmured, turning to leave. "Because by the time I'm done, Amara Bellinger, everyone is going to know exactly why your father really left your family, and it has nothing to do with debt." If you're rooting for Amara and Minjun to fight for each other in front of the whole world, hit subscribe so you don't miss how this ends. The second scandal broke 3 weeks later, and this one was worse, because this one wasn't about Amara at all. It was about her father. Bellinger family secrets. Waitress's father convicted in $2 million fraud scheme. Did Amara know? Amara read the headline 4 times before the words made sense, sitting frozen in Minjun's kitchen while he stood behind her, jaw tight, reading over her shoulder. "That's impossible," she said. "My father left when I was 9. I haven't spoken to him in 17 years. I don't even know where he lives." "I believe you," Minjun said immediately. "But someone dug this up on purpose and released it now on purpose. This isn't investigative journalism. This is a message." The message arrived an hour later, in the form of a single text from an unknown number. "Drop him, or I release the rest."
V.
Amara's hands shook as she showed him the screen. "The rest of what?" Minjun's face went carefully, dangerously blank, the expression she now recognized as the one that had made 3 industries afraid of him. "I don't know, but I intend to find out exactly what Vivian thinks she has, before she gets the chance to use it." What his private investigators found, 2 days later, wasn't about Amara at all. It was about Vivian. 15 years ago, before she'd ever met Minjun, before the designer dresses and the family name, Vivian Cho had been convicted, under a different last name, quietly sealed by a family lawyer, of financial fraud eerily similar to what she'd just tried to pin on Amara's estranged father. She'd stolen nearly $1 million from an elderly employer before her family bought the case's silence and rebuilt her image from the ground up. She'd spent 3 years engaged to a man whose entire chaebol empire ran on due diligence, and she'd never once expected him to turn that same scrutiny on her. Minjun called an emergency meeting with both families' lawyers, laid the file on the table without a word, and watched Vivian's carefully constructed composure shatter in real time. "You have 2 options," he said quietly. "You issue a public retraction admitting you fabricated the connection between Amara's father's conviction and her character, effective immediately. Or I release this file to the same tabloids you've been feeding for the past month, and let them ask you the same questions you tried to make Amara answer." Vivian's hands curled into fists on the table. "You'd really destroy me over some waitress." "I'd really destroy anyone who tried to destroy her," he said. "That's not a threat, Vivian. That's a promise I should have made the night you humiliated her over a broken wine glass." The retraction ran the next morning, buried on page 6 where the original story had run on the front page, but it was enough. Enough for the follow-up stories to shift, slowly, from gold-digging waitress to woman targeted by jealous ex-fiancé and smear campaign, a narrative that, for once, was actually true. Amara sat with her mother on the phone that night, watching the retraction trend quietly instead of the original scandal, and felt something in her chest finally, fully unclench. "He really did that," her mother said, half question, half wonder. "For you." "He really did," Amara said, and for the first time in weeks, she let herself smile without bracing for the next headline. 6 months later, Minjun proposed in the last place anyone would have expected, not at some 5-star restaurant in Seoul, not in front of cameras, but in her mother's diner in Charlotte, down on one knee on the same cracked linoleum floor where Amara had bussed tables as a teenager to help make rent. "I burned the garlic bread the first night I ever cooked for you," he said, ring box open, hands steadier now than they'd been that night on the marble floor. "I've gotten better at cooking since then. I have not gotten any better at sharing you with the world's opinion of us, and I don't plan to start now. Marry me, Amara Bellinger. Let me spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to prove you deserve good things again, because you already have." The whole diner erupted, her mother crying into a dish towel, regulars who'd known Amara since she was in pigtails cheering from their booths, and Amara, steady, sure, finally, completely unafraid, said yes before he'd even finished sliding the ring onto her finger. They were married the following spring, in a small ceremony between Seoul and Charlotte. Two worlds, one love. That made exactly zero tabloid headlines, because Minjun had made very clear to every guest that any leaked photos would be met with lawyers before dessert was served. Vivian, for her part, moved to another country and was never heard from again, though rumor had it she tried the exact same scheme on another wealthy man 2 years later, and it went considerably worse for her the second time. And every year, on their anniversary, Minjun burns the garlic bread on purpose, just to hear Amara laugh the way she did the very first night, the night he decided, quietly and completely, that she was his, and he was never, ever going to share her again. If you stayed until the end and loved Amara and Minjun's story, subscribe and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far this story traveled.